It was my birthday. 34. The kind of age where you're supposed to have figured some things out. I had this idea of how the day would go. Nothing over the top, just dinner, some drinks, a few close friends. And Jason. He told me all week he had a surprise planned. I imagined him showing up with a dumb little cake or something personal. You know, the kind of gesture that makes you feel like you still matter. Instead, he texted me 2 hours before people started arriving. Emergency at work. Can't make it tonight. I'm sorry. I stared at my phone for a second too long. No follow-up. No call. Just that. So I stood there in the rooftop lounge, music playing low, fairy lights blinking like they were mocking me, and tried to smile as people I barely knew handed me wine and compliments. And that's when I noticed Michael. Tall, always wearing some kind of relaxed confidence, like he didn't have to try too hard. I'd seen him before. Jason's gym buddy. I thought he'd leave early like the others once the drinks ran dry. But he stayed. Sat near me. Not too close, not obvious. Just there. At one point, I walked into the kitchen to grab more ice. He followed, said he needed water. Maybe just an excuse. He handed me a glass, and our hands brushed. He didn't pull away right away. That kind of silence hung in the room. Not awkward, just full of something neither of us could name yet. Then he said it, almost like he wasn't even sure he should. You ever get tired of only being someone's priority when it's convenient? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because I was suddenly very aware of how much I'd been trying to pretend that everything was fine. When I came back out to the others, I noticed how everyone looked through me when they said, "Happy birthday," like it was just part of the script. But Michael looked at me. Not with pity, not with flirtation. Just like he was actually there. And for the first time in months, maybe longer, I felt like I wasn't invisible. After the last guest left, I sat on the edge of the couch and looked around at the empty wine glasses and half-eaten cake. My dress felt too tight. The music still played from my phone. Quietly now. Jason didn't call. Not even a good night. I got a message from him at 1:37 a.m. Hope you had fun. We'll do something this weekend. I didn't reply. Instead, I laid there in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that one line Michael said in the kitchen. And the way he said it like it wasn't a question. Like he already knew the answer. Rachel's place always smelled like vanilla and expensive candles. The kind of home that looks like someone actually enjoys being there. It was a low-key evening. Socks off, wine on the couch kind of night. I almost didn't go, but Rachel guilted me into it. Jason said he couldn't make it. Again. Negotiations ran late, he texted Duh. That would have been believable if he hadn't posted a story 2 hours later. Some dimly lit restaurant, a wine glass, and the outline of a woman's arm across the table. No tags. No names. Just vibes. I didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say? Hey, just wondering, is your meeting drinking a Malbec in Soho and laughing at your jokes? Michael showed up about an hour in. He claimed he was in the neighborhood. Rachel gave him a look like she was trying to do the math in her head. Why is Jason's gym friend at my girls' night? But said nothing. That's why I love her. She lets things be. We ended up outside, on the terrace. Everyone else was either drunk, distracted, or arguing about which season of The Office was the best. It was cool out, the kind of September breeze that makes you feel a little more honest. I told him about my hometown. How everything smelled like grass and diesel in the summer. How the high school still had the same vending machines. How I used to think New York would fix everything. He told me about moving here with 2 bags and no real plan. I didn't have a dream or anything. I just wanted to stop feeling like my life was happening without me. I knew that feeling. That weird out-of-body sense that you're watching your own routine from outside. Commuting, eating, sleeping, talking about nothing that matters. Everyone had gone inside by the time he turned to me and said it. Softly. Like he wasn't sure if it would land or bounce off like everything else. You know you deserve better than being someone's backup plan, right? That one hit. Because I did know duh. But it's like, knowing and doing something about it are 2 different beasts. Knowing means you lay awake at night with your heart pounding and your phone silent. Doing something means flipping the table and watching everything you've built crash to the floor. I didn't say anything right away. Just stared out into the dark. And I think that's when something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet understanding that someone somehow was seeing a version of me I'd started to forget existed. When I got home later, Jason was already asleep. I sat in the hallway for a minute before walking into the bedroom. He didn't stir. His phone lit up once, some notification, a name I didn't recognize. I went to bed without turning the lights on. That night, I dreamed of small towns, cracked sidewalks, and people who meant what they said. It was a Sunday. Quiet. The kind of day when everything moves a little slower and you start to believe that maybe things aren't so bad. Jason was humming in the shower. Some indie song he always played on repeat. I was in the kitchen, half distracted, scrolling for dinner ideas. His iPad was on the counter. Screen still unlocked from whatever he last used it for. I opened Safari, typed easy roasted chicken, and then without even thinking, hit the tab icon. Habit. Reflex. Who knows? There were a few tabs open. One was an Airbnb in Tulum. Another was a YouTube video about crypto. And then there was the one that caught my eye. Messages. Synced. I'm not proud of it. I wasn't looking for anything. I didn't wake up that morning planning to snoop. But I tapped it. The thread was labeled, Chloe Crescent Moon. That emoji, that tiny stupid crescent moon, felt louder than anything. The conversation wasn't explicit. No nudes. No confessions of love. But there were way too many hearts. Inside jokes I didn't recognize. Voice notes that started with, guess what happened last night? Things you don't send someone's husband. She called him Jay. He said things like, you get me in a way no one else does. I scrolled and scrolled, waiting to find the line where he'd say, I'm married. This isn't okay. It never came. The shower turned off. I heard him walking around, opening drawers, humming again. I took a screenshot. Not to confront him. Not yet. Just because I needed to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined it. I put the iPad back exactly where I found it, went to the fridge, grabbed a LaCroix, and acted like I'd just spent 10 minutes trying to remember what time looks like. He walked in, towel around his waist, smiling. Hey, you still want to do dinner or just order in? I said, let's just order, and smiled back like nothing had shifted. But something had. I left the house an hour later. Told him I needed fresh air. No plan. I just got on the Q train and let it take me. My hands were cold the whole ride. I kept replaying that one message over and over in my head. Wish I could have seen you last night. I ended up at Michael's. Didn't even text him beforehand. I just showed up. He opened the door in sweatpants, confused, surprised, but not in a bad way. Didn't ask what was wrong. Didn't push. You want coffee? He asked. I nodded. We sat on his couch, 2 mugs in hand, watching the street from his window. No TV. No music. Just the sounds of the city, the occasional siren, and that low hum New York always carries. He didn't ask about Jason. I didn't bring it up. And maybe that silence was louder than anything else that night. Because for once, someone was just there. Not fixing. Not filling the space with advice. Just there. I didn't stay long. Just enough to feel my pulse slow down. To remember that not every room had to feel like a minefield. When I left, he walked me to the subway and said nothing except, text me when you get in, okay? I did. And when I got home, Jason was asleep on the couch, TV still playing. The iPad was on the coffee table. Screen dark. Battery low. Like it had nothing more to say. We met at a cafe downtown, the kind of place where everything is served on wooden boards and the music's just loud enough to cover any awkward silence. Amy and I had worked on a few small projects together through Jason's company. She always struck me as sharp, but never overly friendly. I figured she just didn't do small talk, which I respected. That day though, she was chatty. Maybe she'd just had a good week. Or maybe she'd heard something. I couldn't tell. We were halfway through our second round of oat lattes when she leaned in a little, almost like she was about to tell me a secret but didn't want to seem like she was gossiping. So, random question, she said, playing with her sleeve. Did Jason ever actually go to that Pilates studio near Midtown? I blinked. Pilates studio? Yeah, she nodded. He told us he was doing private classes there twice a week. Just thought it was funny. I go to the coffee shop across the street sometimes and I've literally never seen him go in. She laughed like it was nothing, like she was just pointing out a funny quirk. But she wasn't laughing when she added, "He is there a lot though. In that cafe. With the same woman. Always sitting by the window." My stomach tightened. Not because I didn't already suspect it, but because now it had a location. A pattern. A witness. I played it off, told her I hadn't paid much attention lately. She moved on, started talking about her weekend plans, like she hadn't just dropped a quiet grenade in the middle of the table. Later that day, I walked by that same cafe. Not intentionally. Not really. I told myself I needed a change of scenery, that I was just taking a different route home. I saw her almost immediately. She was sitting outside, sunglasses on, sipping something with whipped cream. She looked up as I passed and smiled like we were old friends. Then out of nowhere she said, "You're Ellie, right? Jason's ex." I stopped walking. "We're still married," I said, though it came out flatter than I meant it to. She tilted her head. "Oh. I guess he made it sound like that was over. Sorry, I didn't mean to make it weird." She didn't look sorry. She looked relaxed. Like she'd won something I didn't even know we were competing for. I went home, closed every app on my phone, and sat in silence for 20 minutes. That night, Michael texted me. He didn't say anything dramatic. "No, how are you?" or "I miss you." He just wrote, "I don't want to interfere. But if you need help getting out of this mess, I'm here. Even if it's just for a walk." And for the first time, I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know if I was running away or waking up. All I knew was that the floor I'd been standing on was slowly cracking. And I had no idea where to land. The corner of the apartment I called my home office was really just a small desk jammed between a bookshelf and the radiator, always half covered in unopened mail and candles I never lit. I'd been saying for months that I wanted to fix it up. Add shelves, move the lamp, maybe make it a space where I could actually think. But like most things lately, I never got around to it. After everything that happened with Amy and that girl from the cafe, my brain wouldn't shut off. The apartment felt louder even when it was dead silent. So I texted Michael. He showed up on a Saturday afternoon with a power drill and a box of cold brew. No questions, no small talk about Jason. Just, "Where do you want to start?" We moved things around for a while, measuring, debating whether the desk should face the wall or the window. It felt good, working on something that had a visible result. When you're in a situation where everything feels out of your control, even screwing a bracket into drywall can feel like reclaiming a piece of your life. At some point, we took a break. I made tea. He found a playlist on his phone that was mostly late 2000s indie. Bands we'd both forgotten we used to love. We sat on the floor surrounded by books I hadn't touched in years. He picked one up and asked why it was dog-eared on so many pages. I told him it used to make me feel understood. We ended up talking about music, childhood stuff, the weird things our parents passed down to us without meaning to. Like the inability to sit still or the way we both kept every birthday card we'd ever been given. There was a moment where the conversation stalled. Not in a bad way. Just one of those pauses where you know something is about to change the direction of everything. Michael looked over at me and said, "Have you ever done something even though you knew it was going to change everything?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. He didn't reach for me or make it into a moment. He just looked at me like he already knew what I was thinking. Not about Jason. Not about us. About everything. Then he stood up, dusted off his jeans, and asked if I wanted to get out of the apartment for a bit. "Just to clear your head," he said. "We don't have to talk. We don't even have to decide anything. Just quiet." I grabbed my jacket. We drove through the city with the windows down, even though it was a little too cold for that. The streets were half empty, the kind of late-night calm that only New York knows how to do. We didn't say much. He just kept his hand on the steering wheel and let the silence settle between us like an old friend. I didn't feel like I needed to explain anything. And for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was bracing for impact. The world was still a mess, but in that car in that moment I felt still. I was standing in the kitchen with one sock on, half distracted by some article I wasn't really reading, waiting for my toast to pop. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic outside, and for once, the stillness didn't feel heavy. That was until my phone lit up with a text from Amy. She didn't waste time on small talk or pleasantries. Instead, she sent a message that felt more like a warning than a conversation. She said she wasn't sure if it was her place, but she thought I deserved to know. Attached was a photo she'd taken the day before. It showed Michael, standing on a sidewalk with a woman I didn't recognize. They were talking, and whatever they were saying must have been funny, because they both looked mid-laugh, completely at ease. He had that same relaxed posture he'd had in my apartment 2 nights ago, the same face he made when talking about books he liked and songs he still remembered the lyrics to. I just stared at the screen, trying to decide whether I was overreacting or seeing something that had been quietly unfolding all along. There was nothing overtly romantic in the photo. They weren't touching. But there was something about the familiarity between them that cut deeper than any cliché red flag could have. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also couldn't ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I called him, not out of panic, but because I didn't want to sit in that weird space between assumption and truth. I needed clarity, even if it was going to ruin the fragile calm I'd built around us. He picked up quickly, sounding exactly like himself. Steady, almost warm, like nothing was wrong. I didn't ask how his morning was. I just told him I'd gotten a photo. I told him I saw him with someone yesterday and that I didn't want to play guessing games. There was a long pause on his end, not because he was trying to lie, but because he wasn't sure how to explain something that had clearly already crossed a line. He told me her name. Said she was someone he'd been seeing before things started with me, and that he hadn't been completely honest about where that stood. He said it wasn't serious, not anymore, but he hadn't exactly ended it either. And then he said something I wasn't expecting. I didn't plan for any of this, he said. I didn't think we'd connect the way we did, and I wasn't ready when it happened. I should have handled it differently. He wasn't defensive. He didn't try to spin it or ask for forgiveness. He sounded like someone who knew he'd messed up, and also like someone who was just as confused as I was. And that somehow made it worse. Because it meant it wasn't about me not being enough. It was about him not being ready to be honest. With me or with himself. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the wall for a while, thinking about how fast things can blur. 1 minute you're rebuilding a workspace and talking about your favorite books, and the next you're realizing that someone else was still in the room, even if you couldn't see them. Maybe this wasn't betrayal in the traditional sense. Maybe we were both guilty of leaning on each other to avoid something we didn't want to face alone. I thought I was moving towards something healthier. But maybe I was just moving sideways. And maybe Michael was too. I didn't block him. I didn't send a long message about disappointment or closure. I just turned off my phone and let the quiet settle in again. Only this time, it didn't feel calm. It felt honest. The call came on a Thursday. I was in the middle of answering emails when his name popped up on the screen. We hadn't spoken in over a week, not really, just scattered texts about mail or packages or something equally unimportant. Seeing his name made my chest tighten a little, not because I missed him, but because I wasn't sure what version of him I was about to hear. He sounded calm. Too calm. The kind of calm you learn to recognize after living with someone long enough. It wasn't peace, it was control. Cold and measured. I saw you with Michael, he said, not even bothering to greet me. I waited. There was nothing to say. No denial, no surprise. Just silence. I'm not going to make a scene, he added, and I almost laughed at how formal it sounded. But you should understand something. Everything you have, this apartment, the cards, the insurance, even your car lease, I set that up. I've been keeping it running. There was a long pause where I think he expected me to interrupt. I didn't. That's going to change, he said. Still calm. Still flat. I'm not being cruel, Ellie. I just think it's time for you to figure out how things work without me. He hung up before I could respond. Or maybe he just didn't care whether I would. Within the hour, I started getting notifications. One of my credit cards was declined when I tried to place a grocery order. The shared account we'd used to cover rent and utilities was suddenly inaccessible. Subscription logins, Netflix, Spotify, logged out on all devices. Quiet little ways of reminding me how much I'd gotten used to the infrastructure he quietly maintained. He didn't scream. He didn't accuse. He just pulled the rug out from under me, inch by inch, like someone slowly turning off lights in a house while you're still inside. I sat on the floor of the living room with my laptop open, watching error messages stack up on the screen, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry. I felt stupid. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I had let myself believe that leaving a marriage was just about emotions. I forgot how much of your life gets quietly tied to someone else's name, their credit, their choices. You spend years building a life together, and when it falls apart, you don't just lose the relationship. You lose the invisible scaffolding too. Later that night, I texted Rachel to ask if she had a spare room for a few days in case things got messy. She didn't ask questions. Just said yes and told me to bring wine. I didn't reach out to Michael. I wasn't sure where we stood. And honestly, I didn't have the energy to find out. Instead, I made a list of everything I needed to separate from Jason. Bank accounts, rent, health insurance, my phone plan. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. I just felt like someone learning to walk again after forgetting what solid ground feels like. This wasn't revenge. It was worse than that. It was a reminder that even when they let you go, they can still pull strings if they want to. And Jason? He wasn't pulling them out of spite. He was just showing me how many of them were his to begin with. The apartment I found was on the edge of Brooklyn, technically still the city, but quiet enough that I could finally hear my own thoughts. It was a walk-up with chipped paint and a temperamental radiator, but it had big windows and light in the mornings, and I didn't need more than that. I signed the lease by myself, moved what little I kept from the old place into the new one, and let the rest go. There's something weirdly satisfying about starting over with only the things you actually use. 3 mugs. 1 frying pan. A chair that doesn't match the table. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. There were moments in the first week where I'd forget where I put things or wake up not recognizing the ceiling above me. But that disorientation always faded quickly, replaced by something slower and steadier, relief. No more waiting for footsteps in the hallway. No more pretending I didn't care about what time he got home or who he was texting. I wasn't lonely. I was just alone. And that felt like progress. Then I saw him. It was a random Tuesday afternoon, and I was at a cafe 2 blocks from my building. One of those tiny places with mismatched chairs and regulars who don't need to say their orders out loud. I was standing in line, thinking about nothing in particular, when I looked up and there he was. Jason. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked like he'd been expecting it. Like this was just another inevitable New York coincidence. He was with someone. She looked younger, put together, the kind of woman who knew exactly how her lipstick matched her coat. They were laughing at something when he turned and saw me. And without missing a beat, he walked over. "Hey," he said, like we were 2 old classmates running into each other at the grocery store. I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. "You look different," he added. "More like yourself, I think. Maybe I was holding you back." It was such a casually cruel thing to say. Not angry, not bitter. Just tossed out like a half-formed compliment. Like he wanted credit for me finally becoming who I was supposed to be. I didn't respond. I didn't owe him anything, especially not the satisfaction of knowing I'd been rebuilding a life from the pieces he left behind. He went back to his table like the conversation hadn't even happened. I took my coffee to go. Back at my apartment, I sat by the window and tried to shake off the weird lingering echo of his voice. The way he said I looked more like myself. Like he had any say in who that was supposed to be. For so long, I'd been trying to define myself in the space between who I was with him and who I thought I wanted to be. And maybe I still didn't have a full picture of what that looked like. But I knew it wasn't someone who kept circling the same stories, hoping for a different ending. That evening, I finally unpacked the last box. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years. An old scarf, a few postcards, a journal I used to write in when I first moved to the city. I opened it, just out of curiosity, and found a line I'd written a long time ago. "If I ever lose myself, I hope I at least notice when I start to come back." And sitting there, surrounded by furniture I'd built on my own and silence I no longer feared, I realized I had. His message came out of nowhere. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since the last conversation where we left things quietly unfinished. There was no fight, no real goodbye. Just a slow fade, like music turning down until you're not sure when it actually stopped. This time, though, he was direct. "I'm moving. Thought you should hear it from me, not someone else. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk. No pressure. Just talk." I agreed to meet. Not because I expected closure or some grand revelation, but because part of me still needed to understand where we'd left each other, and why. We met at a park near the river. It was late afternoon, the kind of spring day that feels like the city's finally thawing out. Kids running through the grass, dogs pulling at leashes, wind carrying the sound of a saxophone someone was playing 2 benches over. I got there early, sat on a bench facing the water, and told myself I wasn't nervous. When he showed up, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. We didn't hug. We didn't sit too close. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. He started with something simple. "You look good. Peace suits you." I nodded, not really sure how to take that. Compliment? Observation? Regret? He sat beside me but left a space between us. After a moment he said, "I don't want to make this heavier than it needs to be. I just didn't want to leave the city pretending you didn't matter." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the water, letting the words settle before I responded. "You did matter," I said. "But maybe we didn't know how to matter to each other the right way." He didn't argue. He didn't try to rewrite the past or offer a version of the story where we both came out innocent. Instead, he exhaled slowly and said something I hadn't expected. "I think I confused wanting connection with being ready for it. And that's on me. You were more real than I was prepared for." I kept telling myself I could handle it, but I was still halfway in something I hadn't truly let go of. I didn't say anything right away. What could I say? We'd already lived the part where we tried, where we crossed lines and made excuses and convinced ourselves that timing wasn't everything. He glanced down at his hands. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I'm not trying to start over. I just needed to tell you I felt something. That I wasn't pretending." "I know you weren't," I said quietly. "But we were both trying to fill a space we didn't understand. That never ends well." The honesty between us was sharp, but not bitter. Just quiet and necessary. We sat there for a while, not saying much after that. Just watching the sun start to dip behind the buildings, letting the silence speak for both of us. Eventually, he stood up and gave me a soft smile. Small, tired, grateful. "Take care of yourself, Ellie." "You too." He walked away without looking back. And for once, I didn't hope he would. There wasn't any dramatic weight to the moment. No final chord. No slow motion. Just 2 people who shared a stretch of road and knew they weren't meant to keep walking it together. He was right. We had felt something. And now, we were finally letting it go. It arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between a cable bill and a coupon for 30% off dry cleaning. The envelope was plain. No stamp that screamed official. No handwriting to give away what it held. Just a return address I didn't recognize and a weight that felt heavier than paper should. Inside were the divorce papers. Everything was already filled out. Jason had signed. No note. No text. No email before or after. No attempt to soften the fact that we were now, legally, no one to each other. It was strange how little it hurt. I stared at the documents for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because it felt like I should be. Like I should be crying or nostalgic or at least feeling something sharp and immediate. But instead, I felt still. Quiet in a way I hadn't expected. I signed where I needed to sign. The pen didn't shake. My hand didn't hesitate. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, not wine, because I didn't want to numb anything. I just wanted to sit in it, whatever it even was. The end of a marriage, sure. But also the end of the story I'd been telling myself for years. That if I just held on long enough, if I was patient, if I worked harder, we'd get back to how things used to be. The truth is, we had stopped being we a long time ago. The paperwork just made it official. Later that evening, out of curiosity more than anything, I checked his social media. We weren't blocked. We weren't connected either. But the profile was public, and I still remembered the username he swore he'd change but never did. He'd moved. Different apartment. Different borough. There were pictures of him standing in front of a new office, something about a startup launch, smiles with people I'd never met. He looked good. Not fake happy. Just light in a way he hadn't looked in years. And I didn't feel bitter. That surprised me the most. As for Michael, he'd disappeared almost entirely. No new posts, no status updates, not even the occasional song lyrics he used to share late at night. He'd gone quiet, Like the chapter had closed for him too. I didn't take it personally. We'd said what needed to be said, and then we both moved forward in our own directions. I kept living. I didn't reinvent myself or move to a new city or start painting just to feel something. I stayed. I found a small job at a marketing studio nearby. Nothing flashy, just honest work with good people. I bought a second-hand bike. I made friends with the woman who ran the laundromat downstairs. I started cooking again, not because I had someone to impress, but because it felt nice to eat something I'd made with my own hands. Most people around me had no idea what I'd just walked through. They didn't know about Jason or Michael or all the quiet ways I'd been slowly putting myself back together. And maybe that was okay. Maybe healing isn't always loud. Maybe starting over doesn't look like a movie montage. Maybe it's just waking up, drinking your coffee while it's still hot, and realizing you don't have to explain your life to anyone. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. It showed up in my mailbox like anything else, wedged between a takeout menu and a health insurance reminder I'd been ignoring for a week. The envelope was blank, sealed neatly, no markings. I almost tossed it without opening it, assuming it was another promo or someone else's mistake. But something about the weight of it made me pause. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No sign-off. Just one sentence, typed in the center. If you could live it all again, would you choose differently? That was it. I stared at the words for longer than I probably should have. Not because I didn't understand them, but because I understood them too well. It didn't matter who sent it. Jason. Michael. Someone else entirely. The question wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to me the moment I read it. And the truth? I didn't have a clean answer. Not because I was confused, or heartbroken, or still caught up in what could have been. But because life doesn't work that way. It doesn't pause to give you time to rewrite. You live it forward, and you make decisions based on who you are then, not who you'll become. There were things I wished I'd seen earlier. Moments I wish I'd spoken up instead of staying quiet. People I held on to too long because I was afraid of what their absence would leave behind. But I also knew this. Every misstep, every delay, every uncomfortable truth cracked something open in me. Not all at once. Not in some poetic transformational way. But slowly. Realistically. Honestly. If I had chosen differently, maybe I'd be somewhere else. But I wouldn't be here, in this small apartment with creaky floors, drinking coffee that I finally learned how to make right, watching the morning light move across the wall like it belongs here. I didn't put the letter away. I didn't throw it out either. I left it on the fridge under a chipped magnet that used to hold up wedding invitations and grocery lists. Now it held a question I no longer needed to answer. Because maybe life isn't about figuring out whether you took the wrong path. Maybe it's about building something real with what's left once the illusions fall away. I stepped out onto the fire escape with my cup and let the city breathe around me. It was loud, messy, unpredictable. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was mine.